and welcome you all to our third Star and D Coffee House event. This one has a great attendance considering the weather, and of course the weather that is to come, I guess. We'll be excited to see what actually happens. But I did want to just say thank you from behalf of the Star and D committee. Arnell Bolero, Nancy Beitler, Lissa Bill, Layla Karst, Corey Colonna, and Amy Geist. We work hard to create and listen to the division and see what are some relevant topics that people would like to learn more about. We do have colleagues from St. Mary's College here and some folks from other divisions on campus, so we welcome them here as well. You would have, if you're in our division, you would have received a little postcard and a complimentary Star and D pen in campus mail last week. If you didn't get one of those, make sure you snag one of us and we'll get you a pen. But this has our calendar of events for the spring semester. It's also on our website at star.nd.edu. But this...
Fred Bonner today. Dr. Bonner is the Samuel DeWitt Proctor Chair in Education at Rutgers University. He actually just made a cross-country move this weekend, so he's starting there. Formerly, he served as Professor of Higher Education Administration in the Educational Administration and Human Resources Development Department and past Associate Dean of Faculties at Texas A&M University College Station. He received a BA degree in chemistry from the University of North Texas, a master's in education, curriculum and instruction from Baylor University, and a doctorate in higher education administration and college teaching from the University of Arkansas, Fayetteville. Dr. Bonner has been the recipient of the American Association for Higher Education Black Caucus Dissertation Award and the Educational Leadership Counseling and Foundations Dissertation of the Year Award from the University of Arkansas College of Education. He has published articles and book chapters on academically gifted African American male college students, teaching in the multicultural college classroom, diversity issues in student affairs, and success factors influencing the retention of students of color in higher education. Currently, Dr. Bonner serves as an assistant editor for the National Association of Student Affairs Professionals Journal and has completed 3 summers as a research fellow with the Yale University Psychology Department PACE Center, focusing on issues that impact academically gifted African American male college students. Dr. Bonner has completed the book Academically Gifted African American Males in College that highlights the experiences of post-secondary gifted African American male undergraduates in predominantly white and historically black college contexts. He has a book that was released in October 2001 by Stylus Publications titled Diverse Millennial Students in College, Implications for Faculty and Student Affairs. He spent the 2005-2006 academic year as an American Council of Education Fellow in the Office of the President at Old Dominion University in Norfolk, Virginia. Additionally, he has been awarded a $1 million National Science Foundation grant that focuses on factors influencing the success of high-achieving African American students in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines in historically black colleges and universities. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Bonner.
Since I'm a Rutgers Scarlet Knight, I can't use my Texas A&M greeting, and that's howdy, so I guess I'll just say hello. I am so excited about being here, and I want to thank all of the folks that made this happen, and it's been wonderful working with Chris, and I have a dear, dear friend who is here at the university and has been a friend, mentor, confidant, Iris Outlaw. We've known each other for years. And actually, I have to tell this story. Iris goes all the way back to the dissertation award that was just mentioned, was part of the American Association of Blacks in Higher Education caucus. And I won a dissertation award, and Iris was actually on the committee. So thanks for selecting me. So I know we have a long way to go and a short time to get there. And I do want to spend and give you some time to interact at your tables and have more of a case study interaction with your colleagues to talk about some of these thorny issues that I plan to unpackage today as we move through the presentation. this particular topic and how I got here, and I'm only going to briefly share with you my background, and I think it's important from a qualitative research and autoethnographic perspective in that why do you do this particular research? That's one thing when I'm sharing dissertations or with my doctoral students, we always have a section in there on positionality. You know, who are you as an individual, and why do you do this work? For me, coming through an undergraduate experience, and actually I can take it back even to K-12, coming through a K-12 experience as an African-American male there in East Texas, and graduating from my high school class, I was in the top 5% of my class. 5% of my class was number 5, 100 people. That was one of the largest classes at that time. But coming through an experience and with having 2 parents who were educated, actually on my mother's side of the family, I am a 4th generation college student. And on my father's side, actually 2nd generation. So having parents who, and interestingly enough, both of my parents were in my high school. My father was my high school assistant principal, and my mother taught science and health. Interesting experience. But coming through with parents who were astute and who knew the education system, who worked in education, who both had graduate level degrees, who worked in the very institution that I attended, K-12, high school, it was really interesting to look at my experiences coming through as a high-achieving student and some of the travails and issues that my parents had to confront or when they had to serve as an advocate on my behalf. And it just made me wonder, you know, well, what happens to those students, those African-American students, those Hispanic students, those poor white students who don't have the parents or the advocates who know to say, you know, this is what we should do, or this is how I want my child to experience, or let me share with you, you know, where my child should be placed in this institution. So coming through with my own experience and actually graduating undergraduate major in chemistry, going through those experiences of K-12 and higher education really made me kind of self-reflect on my own experience. And what really, really resonated with me is I chose to attend the University of North Texas, predominantly white institution there in Texas. But at the same time that I was being recruited by North Texas, Texas A&M, University of Texas, I was also being recruited by Prairie View A&M University, Howard University, Jackson State University, these historically black colleges and universities. And my family tradition, my mother and father were both graduates of historically black colleges and universities, including my grandmother, including my great-grandmother. Very long-standing tradition in HBCUs. And that caused me to wonder, you know, what would my experience, what would it have been had I chosen to attend an HBCU as opposed to this predominantly white institution? Now, granted, my undergraduate experience at North Texas was positive. I had the normal struggles that all students have, majoring in the sciences and majoring in chemistry. Some of you chemistry majors will know PChem, not a fun thing. But I also wondered, how was my experience qualitatively different from my colleagues or my friends, my peers, who chose to attend Howard University, Jackson State University, you know, these other HBCUs in the country. You know, what were these institutions doing to support them, to support their gifts and talents? And was that experience qualitatively different than the experience that I was having as an undergraduate at the University of North Texas? Hence, moving on into my graduate level program, completed my master's at Baylor and became very interested in the experiences of high-achieving African-American males. When we listen to the stories and the narratives about students of color and populations, typically, many times at the bottom, we're talking about African-American males. They are not doing, they're not performing, they're not achieving, they're doing, and it's all the bad stuff. What I call, what the literature calls a deficit perspective. But what I wanted to focus on and what this presentation focuses on is an asset perspective. We spend so much time looking at those African-American males and populations, those minority populations. I even do some research on Hispanic males and their achievement. But we always spend time focusing on the bad stuff, that deficit model approach. But there are African-American males out there, and you see them. You know, they're here at Notre Dame, they're at Rutgers, they're at Texas A&M, who are very, very high achieving, who are very, very successful, who came out of their K-12 experiences with the high grades and the high SAT and ACT scores. But what I have found and what the literature reveals is that the African American, and particularly I'm looking at males, African American males who come out with the same SAT scores, ACT scores as their white counterparts are still dropping out, stopping out, failing out at a rate that's commensurate to the African American male student who comes in who barely gets in the door. There's something wrong with that. And what I have found with my research and in other research is that when you're looking at an African American male who gets into Notre Dame, who is sitting right next to a white male who got into Notre Dame with the same SAT scores, same background, same experiences, but you lose the African American male a year later, what the literature shows and what my research has shown is that there are some other things going on. One of my favorite researchers, William Sedlacek, calls it non-intellective factors, meaning there are some things beyond academics that are causing these individuals to stop out, drop out, fail from their respective institutions. And these are some of the things that I want to talk about today. I don't want to wash away that academics are absolutely positively important. But again, if all things are equal, what are the other things that these students are experiencing? And many times it's things like the social environment, the climate, those peer networks, and we'll talk about some of these things as I move on. So the very first question in this presentation and in my research I asked folks to do is to take a look at these pictures. And spend a little time just talking at your table with your neighbor. And I'm Southern Baptist, so in the Southern Baptist church, many times the pastors will say, turn to your neighbor. And you have this whole engagement throughout church with this dialogue with your neighbor. So turn to your neighbor. And the question that I pose to you is, looking at these pictures, who's gifted? Who's gifted? And I'm going to give you about 2 minutes for that discussion.
Looking at the picture, it looks like he's trying to. I mean, because of that, he's trying to record. The other guy was a Lil Wayne song. Yeah, but maybe sure. Yeah, so I think he should not do it. African American picture. Like, you know, that's like that's why I think that's the boys from Boys and Girls to kind of also like the black doctor and the guy in the blazer, the little boy right now. Oh, sitting on the best spot because flip basketball. I mean, that's all there is. Or you play football. I don't think like I don't know much person. They look like a kind of like an artist. Maybe one who's like in the shirt. He doesn't realize but he kind of fits into like the, I mean, just to say,
Okay, so What brave table would like to share what you came up with? Here, then here? Yes.
Who knows who's gifted in that picture? It's who had opportunity, who was given the path.
Ah.
More than, because any one of those boys in any one of those pictures could be more gifted than the other.
I like that. You've heard this before. Okay. Back here? Yes.
We thought they were all gifted. It wasn't certainly obvious what their gifts might be. You try and guess a little bit, but that they all had gifts, but we certainly didn't know their story.
Excellent. Absolutely. So, didn't know their stories. All gifted. Very good. Anyone else? Other comments? What do you think? Who's gifted? And when I say gifted, I'm talking academically gifted, because I know gifted can be manifested in many different ways. And so, anyone else? Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily call him gifted in the sense of naturally gifted, but the doctor certainly is achiever. So, but I don't know if I would define as natural giftedness.
Okay. And part of what you talk about, we'll talk a little bit about that too, with the whole notion of how we define giftedness. And I have some things to share with you with the NSF grant about that, with the African American students that we focused on when we use that moniker, gifted. Excellent. Someone else? I saw another hand. Yes, ma'am.
I think coming from my perspective as a first generation student, or used to be student, I think one of the problems, so I said first of all that they're all gifted, and one of the problems that we tend to have in recognizing that is, like the guys on the bottom, we couldn't figure out if they were military or if they were in a prison situation. But I said even if they're in a prison situation, when it comes to first generation people, a lot of times what happens is they don't know their gifts, and nobody is able to then help them point those gifts out, so they end up places that they're not supposed to be. So I think it's a matter of facade. We judge based on facade, and that judgment then influences them even themselves.
Excellent. And this picture, yes, it's like a chain gang, and I purposefully chose that picture because of exactly what you said. There are tons of people in prison. If you didn't know it, check it out. There are, and the literature bears it out. So absolutely, very, very, very good. Can you all hear me? I know I'm supposed to stay close to the mic, so I'm a Texan, so I'm a big mouth. Very, very good. And the reason I put this picture up there is for the very reason to begin and to initiate the dialogue, because if you can't see it or believe it or perceive it about these students, then they don't move forward because of the barriers that we've constructed. And the main reason I put that up there, let me ask you this. If you had to come up with the top 3 reasons, and I'm going to take it out of a post-secondary context and put it in a K-12 context. So take it back to K-12. What do you think the top 3 reasons are that African American males go under-identified or non-identified for gifted and talented in K-12? What do you think the top 3 reasons are? In another short time, just 2 minutes, share with your neighbor. What are the top 3 reasons? Share with your neighbor. See if you can come up with 3.
From what kind of but I city on a city schools where we just don't have jobs. So student housing is a place that they go. Because they're focusing on so many other things. They're just trying to stay focused on one thing and their academic achievements. So that would be nice. I mean, having
Okay. So, again, another brave table. What are your top three? What are your top three? Brave table? Yes.
Well, one of our top ones was peer pressure.
Peer pressure? Okay, absolutely.
Not wanting to stand out, you just want to blend in, you want to be accepted by
I am
peers.
so glad you said that because we're going to talk about that. Peer pressure. Excellent. Okay, what else? Yes.
I can't give you three, but one of our top ones was opportunity of the schools, perhaps, that they've been in, where they where there's someone there who is able to identify.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Very, very good. We'll talk about that as well. I'm glad you said that. Yes, sir.
The things that we talked about was nutrition and shelter, such as sleep, nutrition.
So,
A lack of good nutrition would prevent somebody from succeeding. Lack of a place to get quality rest would prevent somebody from succeeding.
so those very basic needs, if you look at Maslow or some of the other hierarchies or models. So, very good. Excellent. A few more?
To talk about maybe prejudgment by teachers or school administrators.
Absolutely, and that connects to what was said over here very strongly, and we're going to talk about that. Very good. Glad you said that. Here?
And standardized testing
Standardized testing.
doesn't take into account the cultural factors.
Doesn't take into account the cultural balance. Standardized testing. I'm so glad you said that. Because we were really going to talk about that at the end. I have something for the SAT, GRE, ACT crowd. We're going to talk about that. Okay.
Sort of along with the prejudgment that was just mentioned, we tend to believe if somebody is a troublemaker, they can't be gifted, and
Yes.
anybody who is not focusing, who's having fun, who's laughing, who's more outspoken, who's not paying like the attention we think they should be paying, is labeled as a troublemaker.
Yes.
So I don't know if that's like cultural or if it's family or if it's personality, but that can lead to it too, because we write someone off if they're disrupting the classroom, as that they can't be academic.
Yes, I'm glad you said that. So let me share with you, all of these are very good, and actually they all fold into the top three. Now this is just what someone wrote down. My hero, Shiro, in the field is Donna Ford. She's one of the leading experts in the nation on African American giftedness. Several books, several book chapters, several articles. She's at Vanderbilt University. And what Ford has revealed as the top three reasons are: number one, teacher nominations. Most of the time, to get into gifted and talented, many times, teachers nominate students who they believe, perceive, state, this student is gifted. So the student should be tested or should be placed into gifted and talented. Well, all of the stuff that you just said is one of the major reasons why students of color don't get placed into gifted and talented, especially African American male students placed into gifted and talented. Because teachers have a perception of what giftedness looks like. Giftedness, for many teachers, doesn't look like this, with the tats, or sagging, or the dreads, or giftedness doesn't look like this. Giftedness looks like this, with the ties and the jacket, and it's exactly what you said back here. If you truly look at gifted and talented students or high achieving students, they're not the student that's raising their hand, is always on time, always has their assignments. Many times, and especially in K-12, it's a student that, did we ever have an assignment? Did I have a book? Is this my right classroom? I don't know where my shoe is. What And for teachers, for some teachers, they don't recognize giftedness and gifts and talents as looking like that. And many times, this brother could be profoundly gifted, get beyond the tats and the dreads and all that, and not get beyond it. I mean, this cultural expression, why can't you look like this, but still do well. You know, that's the one thing and the motivation of my research is that I want to know that African American male, that brother who comes from that side of the tracks, from maybe a single parent household with no resources, with no income, and that student still can sit in your class and make a 99 on your physics test. I need to know what that student is doing. That's an asset model approach. I need to know what I can take from that student and put in a bottle or distill to sprinkle over the rest that are not doing so well. Because if you can face all this adversity and you're resilient enough to still perform academically, then that's what I need to know. Number 2 reason, standardized testing. Teacher nominations, number 1, standardized testing, number 2. At the end of this presentation, and this is the book and this is the research, I'll talk to you a little bit about standardized testing, what I found with the case studies of the 2 African American males in my study. But one thing in general that we have found, I worked for Robert Sternberg at Yale in the Pace Center for a couple of summers and love Sternberg. I mean, one of our quintessential experts on giftedness. But Sternberg had a really profound article, I think it was a 2007 article, and he basically said, giftedness is what the community says it is, or what it wants it to be. In some communities, scoring 1,000,001 on the SAT means nothing. Survival, making it to school, being able to help my mom, and we live off of this small salary that my mom is making, but I'm able to take care of my brothers and sisters and even take care of my mom at times, that might be giftedness in my community. But the problem is, we don't always value those forms of giftedness that are expressed by individuals from different cultural communities. We get stuck on standardized tests. And I will tell you, SAT, ACT, GRE, those are the worst measures to identify students of color for gifted and talented or for graduate school or whatever else we're using it for. Grades aren't perfect, but they're better measured than standardized tests. You know, but one of the things, and one of my heroes was Asa Hilliard. And back when I was doing my dissertation, I used one of his quotes. He had a very profound quote. He said, standardized tests, they ask 2 questions. They typically ask the wrong question. Standardized tests typically ask the question, do you know what I know? As opposed to asking, what do you know? And by that, what Asa Hilliard was saying is that the person who constructed the test, all of their mores, traditions, cultural background, cultural loadings, all that stuff is going to be played out on the test. You know, so if I don't come from the community, or if I don't come from a household where my parents have all these books and I know what recalcitrant means, you know, then I'm going to be locked out. That has nothing to do with my intelligence. That has everything to do with social capital and my access. And that's the problem that we get into many times is we measure academic potential and achievement based on the acquisition of prior knowledge. And that's unfair because you're not starting with equal products. You never are starting with equal products. I get surprised when people go into these forums and they're like, the African American and Hispanic students are not doing as well as the white students on the SAT or GRE. Duh. I'm like, yeah, you know, look at the background and look at the experiences. And it's not making excuses, but it's realizing you're not starting with the same products. So that whole standardized testing thing is at best smoke and mirrors. It is. Because you really are measuring what the student has acquired or the background where the students come from. Classic example, and I'll move away from this. Donna Ford. She presented at this conference I attend every year. It's next month actually. It's at Teachers College. It's the Winter Roundtable. If you haven't had an opportunity, check Google Winter Roundtable, Teachers College. Awesome conference on social justice and diversity. It's February 24th and 25th this year. It's only a Thursday and Friday, so if you have a chance, it's worth going to New York for this conference. She was one of the keynote speakers, and she was presenting on standardized testing and talking about, you know, the cultural loadings and how it really is a measure of your background and where you come from. And she's like, here I am, an endowed professor at Vanderbilt, the first endowed professor, African-American professor at Vanderbilt University. And she said, I will tell you, I was consulting with the school district, and I was telling them about standardized testing. And she said, and I was looking at the test, And she said, and one of the words, I was like, I can't do this analogy myself because I don't know what this is. You know, what is an isthmus? You know, the little island that jets out or whatever. So she said that. She said, do you guys know? And there were maybe 2 people in the room that said, oh yeah, I know what that is. She was like, I didn't know what the heck that was. You know? And she was like, so if I'm doing this test with these analogies, then I'm locked out. You know? And from that, I mean, I've seen many more examples like that. There's a book called Twice as Less by Jacqueline Orr. And she talks about the math acquisition skills and how African American students that they had bused from this inner city school in New York to, I want to say it was someplace in New Jersey. It was like a private school, a boarding school. And they were looking at assessments and they saw how the African American students weren't doing as well in math. And one of the teachers had a student to write down how you understand this, as opposed to just looking at the math and the algorithm. And the student wrote down, 2 is twice as less as 4. And the person was like, and it's like, yeah, 2 is twice as less as 4. And they went through this whole dialogue about how language and narrative and the background, and the student was not wrong, but the way the student explained it and understood it was very much based on that cultural understanding and that cultural community. There's a technical term for it called the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, in that your worldview and your understanding is totally based upon where you come from, you know, how you interpret, how you filter. The very last, so we got teacher nominations, standardized testing. The third, student motivation. And in the vernacular of the millennials, you know, we get it twisted, the old folks, because we think that it's such a badge of honor to be in a gifted and talented program. I mean, we're older, we get it. You know, you should want to be gifted and talented. This means you get to go to Rutgers or Notre Dame or Texas A&M. You get to go to these great places. It's a great thing. So you need to think about your future. They're not thinking about that. They're thinking about having a good time with their friends. And for African American males, it doesn't play out that great on the basketball court for you to be smart. You know, so here it is. You know, you place me in gifted and talented. 1, I'm not going to be around any other black folk, or very few. You know, 2, I'm already being teased incessantly by my friends who are like, oh, you're over there with those nerds or those eggheads, and you don't want to hang out with us. You think you're better than us. You know, so it's this whole narrative behind that. So students aren't motivated to do that. Now, there's a term that you hear when you look at the literature. It's called acting white, and we've thrown that around a lot. It goes to the research of Signethia Fordham and John Onfu. They had a landmark article. And basically what the article said was that students, especially African American students, will dumb down their potential because to be smart is to be white, or you're acting white. Now there have been a couple of different versions and a couple of different takes on that model. And what they have found is there's a little bit of a schism now. The whole notion of acting white, it plays out in a K-12 context as it was previously operationalized, but it means something different in the higher ed context. Not that we throw it out, it still does exist, but it doesn't look the same. The animal is a little bit different. Acting white in the K-12 context is, you know, you're smart, you're gifted and talented, you know, to be smart is to act white, you know, you're there with the white folks, you don't want to be with the black folks because you're in GT. In college, that kind of falls apart because, you know, if you get to college, if you get to Notre Dame, you're supposed to be smart. You know, you're supposed to have the academic potential. But what acting white means in this context is, why are you not in a black organization? Why do you not hang out with black people in the pub? You know, why do you not attend an African American church? Why do you not? So it becomes this visible symbol. So the Notre Dame student, and this whole notion of trying to eschew acting white, is to gravitate towards all things black in a visible sense. In K-12, when you say acting white, it's the being gifted and talented, don't want to be smart, dumb down my potential. I really couldn't make a 99.9 on your test, but I'm going to make a 62 because the rest of my friends did. So it means something a little bit different. Make sense? Okay. So take a look at the state. write this down when you get a chance on your own. You can Google Black Boys Report. Just Google Black Boys Report, and then you can put the foundation to make sure you get it. So Google Black Boys Report, and then put SCHOTT, S-C-H-O-T-T. Just put those words in the Google box and it'll come up. What the SCHOTT Foundation does is that like every, I want to say 4 years, might be 3, they do an assessment state by state of how well African American black boys are doing in our nation's public schools. And the reason that the SCHOTT Foundation focuses on black boys, is kind of the main reason I focus on black boys, is when you look at the populations in schools who are doing the least well, then it's typically African American males or black boys. So when you Google SCHOTT Foundation, one of the pages has a state by state graduation rate for African American males or for black boys. The interesting thing is this map is interactive. So you can click on it and it will tell you exactly what's going on in the state as far as the number of African American males that are placed in gifted and talented, the numbers that are placed in special education. It'll show you the NAEP progress, the math and reading scores, and then it will also show you disciplinary action, the number of African American males that were disciplined for various infractions. Really, really interesting. One of the things that you see here when you look across, you have a red state, and Indiana is a red state. The red state graduation rate for African American males or black boys is below 50%. When I look at Texas, between 50 and 59%. And again, when you get an opportunity, just click on that and it will show you. I will tell you overall nationally, I believe the graduation rate for black males nationally is something like 47%. 47%. Yep, 47%. So here are a couple of bullets that I took from that particular report. And one of the things that, I want to focus on this second bullet point. I don't want us to get complacent, because many times what happens is we'll have some type of novel program. Texas A&M is doing some program. Baylor's doing this program, and we brought 50 African American males here to campus. So we work with the school district, and it's got 20 African American males. Success, we're done. No, you're not, because when we look at the numbers, we are losing 1.2 million, and this is 08, 09 data. 1.2 million a year we're losing. They're just not graduating. When you have, and many scholars in my field and that do the same type of research that we're doing, and I've even heard this from a national level with some of our governmental officials, we really are in a state of crisis when we look at the experiences and the educational experiences and potential of African American males. You could extend that to look at African American females, you could look at Hispanic males, Hispanic females. African American females tend to fare better than African American males. When you look at the rate of African American females in college compared to African American males, it's like 8 to 1. So again, when you're looking, and I will tell you a lot of the stuff that I'm saying, some of the things can apply to females as well, but again, the focus on males is because this group, is the lowest of the low when we start looking at academic potential and success and how well they're faring. And here we talk about that whole notion of the pipeline. If these folks aren't graduating, if you're only graduating 47%, what are the rest of us to do? And do we care? We should. You have, only 47%, and the rest of the folks, what do they do? Are they locked out? Do they drop out? Do they stop out? I'm just going to go past this. That's a little bit of what I talked about. So here is the crux of the matter. When I look at some of the research, we see that African American males continue to suffer from over-inclusion in special education and under-inclusion in gifted and talented education. And here are some of the major issues that I tend to touch on, and we talked a little bit about today. That deficit modeling approach, and that we always look at those that are not doing well, but can we look at those that are successful, at some point in time? How we define giftedness, and someone said that earlier. We really have to look at how we define giftedness. And many times our definition, if you do Howard Gardner, is that logical mathematical giftedness. We only base it on, high achievement in math and reading, so we don't look at those other areas. I will tell you, if you look at the definitions of giftedness, the Marlin definition of 1972 and the more progressive definition by the Department of Ed in 1993, you see a shift or a little bit of a change in more of an ecumenical view of what giftedness is. In the very first definition, it was very cut and dried with standardized testing, you do well in artistic areas, creative areas. The 93 definition pulled in things like giftedness is recognized from all cultural communities across all socioeconomic strata. It's really funny, I guess, because I do the intersection of giftedness and culture. It's always funny for me when the field, those of us that do this work, when the field kind of catches up with the stuff that we've been doing for quite some time. So I literally was just floored. I was happy that it happened, but I was just floored. I was at a national meeting last year, and they made this announcement. I'm actually about to move on to the diversity board of one of our major national gifted organizations. And I was at a meeting last year, so one of the comments was, we're so excited because the emphasis now is going to be on the gifted poor. There are gifted kids who are poor. That's new? I'm thinking in my head. I just said, oh yeah, there are. Let's work on that. So that's one of the things that, with the definition, we're so narrowly defined on what giftedness means. Also, identity development issues. I teach a course on multicultural issues in higher education. And one of the things that we talk about, a major portion, is not only gender identity development, but racial identity development. And there's a whole lesson. We can talk about some of the major models like Cross's model of negrescence and all that stuff. But most of the models say the very same thing. You kind of move through this phase of with your own racial identity of really being unaware of what it means to be a person of color. Then you have some disequilibrium experience that lets you know you're a person of color. Then you become very angry, and then you don't want to be surrounded by anybody but people of color. And then you find out as you develop that there are good people, bad people of all colors, all races, and kind of reach this self-actualization mode. Well, one of the things that's important to understand is that where an African-American male student is with his identity has a lot to do with how well he's going to do academically. If I'm at a point in my racial identity development where I'm in what Cross would call immersion. Immersion is where, right before, I've had this experience called encounter. So I left the high school in Indiana where I was around this very multicultural population, and everybody's always been my friend, and I never had this. And then someone in the CAF or the library calls you the N-word. And now all of a sudden you're in this disequilibrium experience. So now you're very angry, so you go into what he calls immersion. If you have an African-American male who's in immersion, that student typically doesn't do as well academically because they're closed off. You, white teacher, will never reach me, African-American male, because I'm angry and I'm closed off. Not because I just want to be angry, but someone just called me the N-word in the cat. So, given my developmental level as an undergraduate, I can't separate right now. That's even difficult for adults to do. But think about the populations that you're dealing with. I can't separate that right now, so I'm just angry with everyone. So if you don't know that and know some of these things, you'll read it or map it the wrong way. Another African-American male, no potential, blah, blah. There are generational challenges. That gets into a lot of the millennial stuff, with this generation being very different. I look at the African-American students now compared to when I was going through, I graduated high school in 1987, and I'm a Generation Xer. And I look at these millennials and I'm like, I don't think I would say that to my professor. And some of it is, yes, sometimes they are being rude. Some of it is, it's a whole different generation. They don't have those barriers or those walls. I would walk into my chemistry class undergrad and sit there and it's like, Professor, oh. Not so much now. And stereotype threats. And that is a whole body of research by Steele at Stanford University, psychologist. that basically says that my perception that you are stereotyping me actually serves as a barrier to my potential. A lot of gobbledygook to say that the African American male who shows up to take the exam is not necessarily thinking about the exam or how well I need to do, but I'm thinking that you're looking at me thinking that I shouldn't even be in this class or that I'm not going to be successful. And it has an impact on how the student performs. This was actually vetted with white male populations. They conducted a study where they kind of did this, dummy exam, and they set students up, and when students would come up, unless it was a white male, they would just hand the exam. If a white male came up, it's like, oh, here you go. Asian students typically do better. So it's like, did he just say that Asian students typically do better? So when the student sat down, guess what the student had on his mind? The fact that Asian students do better. You have, put this in my brain. That's a lot of what stereotype threat is about. So all these things I found have been really important considerations when we look at the experiences of students of color. One last story about this, and we'll move to the next slide. That whole notion of stereotype threat is not just this ephemeral thing that floats in your head. I mean, it's real. My BFF, Dr. Aretha Marbley, we went in the doctoral program together at the University of Arkansas. She's a professor now at Texas Tech. And she tells this story all the time. Her son, Courtney is like a moving mountain. Courtney played football for Texas Tech for like his first 2 years. But Courtney is like 6'6" and something like 325 pounds. I mean, he's a moving mountain. But a brilliant kid. And Aretha tells the story of how Courtney, he was a biochem major. Courtney, I think it was his junior year, I think it was, had signed up for a Cal 3 course. So he shows up for the Calculus 3 course, and the professor is, welcoming all the students. It's the first day. And Courtney's about to walk in, he's there, and he's got his jeans on, his baseball cap, and he's about to walk in. The professor says, hold up. And he's like, yes. He was like, this is Cal 3. And Courtney's like, yeah, that's my class. And the professor's like, are you sure? So he reaches in his book bag, and pulls out the schedule and says, are you Professor X? And he's like, yes. He's like, that's the class. And the professor looks at him, doesn't apologize, and then just says, whatever. He remained in the course, did well, but this set the tone. So we talk a lot about how you hear this stuff, you research this stuff, but these are real experiences. These are lived lives. I mean, I hear this stuff all the time. And it gets difficult. We were talking this morning about my particular world. I don't know what my world will be at Rutgers. I think it'll be great, but the world that I left at Texas A&M, our department, it was all about social justice. That was our frame, that was our framework. So I was sharing with Iris, even my white colleagues were even more radical about social justice and stamping out injustice and dealing with diversity issues than my African American Hispanic colleagues. It was absolutely amazing. And that's one of the things, hopefully today, I'm giving you more information to serve as an ambassador for diversity, or to think very differently as we look at the students and students of color and their experiences. I just want to show you this video, and this is tied to the book and to my research. What I decided to do was to, so what I decided to do, I was really interested in the experiences of African American males in the HBCU and the traditionally white institutional context. So that is all of what this particular book and my focus is on. I wanted to know, what were the institutions doing? What does it mean to attend Notre Dame versus attend Howard? And what does the institution do to support the gifts and talents of these high-achieving students? I want to briefly show you this little clip. Let's see, we have some sound. It
And we're just going to watch a little of it.
Male in his 20s. We are told he has a large afro, sideburns. He was wearing a silver chain at the time.
Police say the suspect is a black man, 6'1", 160 to 180 pounds, about 35 years in age.
Suspect is a black male, aged 16 to 18.
The suspect is African American.
Police say
a black man. Suspect.
Suspect
is a black male.
Black man.
Black male. Man. Black man.
Remember that sacrifice you talked about? 19. This is part of that.
For most teens, summer means sleeping late and the swimming pool. Tony Gardner's days were different.
Good work.
It was definitely different. It was new for me. I'd never done anything like that before.
Let's go, get him up.
Over the next 2 weeks, Tony and his peers will be challenged mentally, physically, and emotionally.
Coming back down.
To help point them in the right direction.
We discipline them to discipline themselves. And part of that is mentoring and role modeling.
That's where you dig yourself in, like a tree.
Gil Whiting, a Vanderbilt professor, is introducing this group to a form of sweat equity, working hard today to secure a brighter future.
I'm asking these guys to look down the road now. So a lot of it has to do with them being more focused.
Come on.
As tough as the training is, the teens say it's nothing compared to school.
It's a struggle. Sometimes you gotta go through racist people. Young black males are viewed as lazy, unintelligent.
When we try to achieve, you know, they put us down.
It's just like time is repeating itself again.
In the 1950s, the battle for civil rights was fought in the classrooms.
I believe we've got to have laws that go along with education and understanding.
In southern states, Jim Crow laws had created separate but equal school systems that were anything but. At the time, Alabama would spend 60% more on its white students than for its blacks.
And Supreme Court or no Supreme Court, we are going to maintain segregated schools down in Dixie.
But in 1954, the Supreme Court ruled unanimously in Brown versus the Board of Education that segregated schools were unconstitutional.
The reaction from my parents was one of shouting and jumping up and down, the expectation, the hope that this decision would open up America.
The court's decision would dismantle institutional segregation in America, but not its effect.
I would say that we are minus square one. We're minus 1954 in Brown versus Board of Education. The notion that there should be a heady and robust investment of talent, time, and treasure into the public school system has been almost a joke.
50 years later, black students continue to lag behind. More than half never finish high school. Those who do graduate are 4 years behind their white counterparts in reading and math. In many schools, the achievement gap has turned into a gulf.
That makes it that much more important to focus on this group to try to help some of them beat the odds.
You have an opportunity to study or go out, and both events happen at 2 o'clock. Which one are you going to choose?
Vanderbilt professors Donna Ford and Gil Whiting have spent years studying underachieving black students. It's their mission to put the research to work.
Study that you just mentioned.
Do these ideas that we create in the academy, in the Ivy Tower, do these ideas actually work?
You want to be a good athlete? You want to be a good academic? Then you have to make some sacrifices. Did you actually think that?
To test their theories, Whiting and Ford created the Scholar Identity Institute,
If he can do it, you can do it, right?
an academic intervention program for young black men.
He manifested his own destiny.
So we want the young men to be book smart, to have that academic sense, but also be well-rounded and be a good person.
He was uncomfortable, as he said, with how his family was living.
Begun in 2006, the Scholar Identity Institute brings together Nashville teens who desire to succeed.
I want to be an accountant.
graduate from medical school with an MD.
I would like to be a mechanical engineer.
People brag about a lot of stuff.
Turning the future into reality requires a reality check.
Drive, determination, and hustle gets you the job.
So if education is that important, you ask yourself too, where are you putting your money, one, and where are you putting your time?
To develop stronger students, Whiting uses lectures, workshops, and role-playing to target the attitudes and behaviors students need in order to excel.
Can you be in school every day? Can you do the lessons, read the plans, write the papers?
What are some of the other things that's blocking you?
So you may be planting the first seed in their minds to get them thinking that the future is real and I am in control of most of that.
We wanted them to focus first and foremost on effort, which is internal. You can control your effort.
I can't just go off the wall and come out with an idea and just do it. I have to plan it and organize it.
So what was the first construct we talked about?
Through life's lessons and years of research, Whiting has identified 9 characteristics or constructs of a student who sees themselves as a success. The scholar identity model is rendered in pyramid form, symbolizing strength, knowledge, and wisdom. At the model's bedrock is the first construct, self-efficacy, a person's belief in their ability to produce positive results in their life.
If I have a lot of confidence, then I have a better chance of being successful.
Future orientation.
Studies and schoolwork should be my main focus right now.
Willing to make sacrifices.
Making the right choices each day in order to make that goal that you set for yourself.
Internal locus of control.
Controlling yourself instead of letting other people control you.
Achievement versus affiliation.
You need to be successful rather than having a need to be accepted into a group.
Self-awareness.
You gotta know yourself before you can really get out there. Because if you don't know yourself, you're just gonna get lost.
Academic self-confidence.
I will actually do my work, and I'm not gonna fall asleep in class like I usually do.
Race pride.
It's helped me learn about myself and my community and about my history.
And masculinity.
My masculinity, it's not at risk or jeopardized by my intelligence, and it doesn't equal being a thug, violent, or controlling.
We believe that they can actually do more than they believe, and then show them how to get there. We show them the model, then we show them how to get there step by step.
They're teaching us the real life situations. They're teaching us how.
So what do you think? What do you think? Given everything that we've talked about to this point, because I still haven't hit you with my model and the stuff that we're really going to talk about at the end that I want you to talk to your neighbor about, but where are you so far? Finger on the pulse of the crowd. What do you think? And I use Whiting. That was not a board my she wrote, but I use Whiting's model a lot. I actually had one of my doctoral students just completed a dissertation, and he looked at high-achieving African-American males in predominantly white institutions and HBCUs in engineering from low-income backgrounds. You'll see his name and his research popping out there in a while, Alonzo Flowers. But he used Whiting's model as his theoretical framework and took a lot from that. But where are you? What do you think?
I'm thinking that pyramid, I spent a lot of time through my kids doing those very things with my children all through high school just to get them there.
Just to get them there.
Because they would be sleeping in class and using their time on devices, and I was always cracking them up.
Absolutely.
But, so, it seems like a huge thing to ask. I mean, as a parent, it's hard enough, but this is a daunting task.
Yes, ma'am.
How different is this, or how does it overlap with simply a student development model, particularly applied just to any low achievement?
For any low achieving student?
Regardless of class, social, economic, race.
That's a good question, and I get that a lot. I haven't actually looked at I haven't seen the application of his model to any other population, even in his writing, other than African American male population. So I can't answer that because he hasn't even done that. But I will tell you some of the models and some of the frameworks that I have seen and that I have used. And I actually teach a course on advanced student development theory. We talk about a lot of those models. A lot of those things that you see that play into this is not like these things won't work for white students as well. You know, one of the things I say is I study high achieving students and gifted students. If we were to do for all the students what we do for the high achieving students, all of them would be successful. So I would say probably, but I don't know, not here to attest it, that a lot of this stuff will work even for white male students. You know, but what they have identified are the thorny issues that absolutely positively, lead to the success of African American males. You saw that masculinity was at the top. And that's actually one of my, Chris will talk about this, that's actually one of my favorite presentations. There's a presentation that I pulled together called Man Up. And it looks at masculinity and high achieving African American males, because when you look at the intersection of what it means to be high achieving and to be a man, sometimes that falls apart. Not just for African American males, but for white males as well. To be smart is to not be masculine. We talked about the active white thing. So it's so many things. I mean, the high area of research that I'm doing a lot of my exploration now is with intersectionality. So we look at the intersection of what it means to be gifted, black, male, and whatever other intersection. At the center of that, who is that person? Because many times we'll come up with a program, and we really have to be careful in institutions like Notre Dame, or the Notre Dames and the Baylors of the world, and those institutions where, and this comes from, I have a student right now, Sheila Creer, and I'm sharing her dissertation. She's looking at the experiences of African American women in what she's calling elite institutions. Sheila works at Rice University. And I will tell you that Rice is a different animal from any other thing in Texas. I mean, it is an elite institution. And one of the things that Sheila found when we were trying to come up with a theoretical orientation or a model is that she's like, I immediately wanted to go in and use racial identity development, use regressives. And she said when I got out there, what I found is that many of these black women and whites, they don't necessarily think about race first. It might be an issue of gender, or they come from a background because they've always been high achieving. It might not necessarily, be the race piece of the issues there. But you wouldn't know that unless you look at the intersectionality of that student to see, what is the main issue. Any other? Yes, sir.
When I look at the video, I think about how fortunate these kids are to have this opportunity to socialize in such a way. It's going to pay off for them. And I wonder about how they envision applying that systemically in institution masses.
Yeah, and I actually talked to, Dr. Ford actually was one of my reviewers when I had to go through the full professor process again. This is now Chair Bunker. She was one of my external reviewers, so we actually talked quite a bit. And she was talking a little bit about the Identity Institute. And they're great and they're wonderful. Donna and Gilman don't know very well. They suffer from the very same thing that I suffer from. And there are about 5 of us out there that do research on high achieving African students. And all of us, we're doing the work. And we get opportunities to speak and people read our stuff. But it's not this, concerted everywhere. Institutions are soaking it up. It's still very localized. I mean, Donna Ford, she's everywhere. You can't look her. That's her thing. But it's still very localized. So she talks about the way she's doing it. I'm very surprised that, this is where folks are. There's out there saying what I need. I'm not quite so sure what we're going to do. It's not panning out like it should. But we're, I think efforts like this, and with, great folks like, Chris and what they're doing, and even bringing this to the forefront, that's the very reason I'm leaving Texas A&M going to Rutgers. They're like, we really want this to be a mecca and a think tank for looking at issues on improving the conditions of African American males and Hispanic males and underserved populations. P20, so come and make us look good. do it and do some real stuff and get out there, you know. So folks are trying. I think it's still very localized.
Well, think about like if you had a magic wand and you could kind of dictate, you know, some systemic changes or institutional policies to kind of make this happen, what would that look like?
I don't want to answer that. I'm going to let y'all do that in just a minute. And then I'm going to talk about it. I'll respond to it, but I want to hear what you have to say about it first.
I was on the broad-based planning committee for my school district, my son's school district, for years. And change doesn't happen until the legislation changes. And once the legislation changes, then Indiana is all about, oh, now we've got to identify these students. And so, and that's the answer, is changing the legislation. That's where it's got to go.
I've seen some wonderful, I mean, gosh, in Texas, I participate every summer. It's my service. I participate every summer with the Texas Association of School Boards. So if you are a school board member in Texas, you have to go, new school board member, you have to go to this week-long training session, 2-day training session. And they have one session in Fort Worth and one session in San Antonio. You go to one or the other, it's mandatory. And they have professors from all across the state to come and present research. Well, they always want me to come and present on underrepresentation of African American and Hispanic students in gifted. And just like you said, you know, I've actually gone out and done 1,000,001 workshops, and I've seen some amazing things that a superintendent and a school district is doing, but it's not systemic. Systemic across the state. I mean, it's like, oh, this wonderful thing is going on in Rockdale. This wonderful thing is going on in this school district in San Antonio. This wonderful thing is going on, you know, but I just get worried when we don't connect the dots, just like you're saying. And it's legislation. I mean, you have to affect and change policy and get folks in who can really speak to and put it in language people understand. Because, you know, I really appreciate this venue, and I guess I've done this enough that I get vibes, you know, from the audience. And, you know, usually after I have a debriefing with the individual that brought me in. But I will tell you now, I mean, it's a great vibe from this audience. I mean, really receptive. I will tell you there are some places where even the superintendents are like, this is going to be a rough one, but I want you to do it. I want you to do it. I'm like, gee, thanks. So, and even with some of the rougher crowds, they're like, you know, I guess it's your presentation style. You try to give them a spoonful of sugar, but I don't sugarcoat it. I mean, I still tell them, I'm like, if we really are going to make a difference for these communities of color, we got to do real talk. You know, you can't play the game and just sit around, and you have to lead and put things into action. And typically, you know, it's that legislative piece.
It's that resources.
And the money.
The resources. It's not fair that school districts aren't equal.
Absolutely.
It's not fair.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I don't know, I'm pretty sure all of you have probably read this book called Savage Inequalities, Kozel. This is a book from years ago. If you haven't, read it. Savage Inequalities, Jonathan Kozel. He was at Harvard. It's an excellent book, but he does like these vignettes of these different schools. And he talks about how we use this language of equality and equity and how we mix the E's. And you have to be careful because we'll say, you know, we want equality and we're going to give all schools, you know, this, and we're going to make all things equal. And Kozel's like, no, you're absolutely crazy. You're not, because you're not starting at the same point. So he gave this very poignant example. I think the schools were in New Jersey. I think it was Cherry Hill versus some other school district there in New Jersey, which was really impoverished district. Or it might have been Cherry Hill versus, he was looking at the school district in East St. Louis. And he said, to go in and give $1 million to this school in Cherry Hill, guess what they're going to do with it? They're going to improve their athletic facility. They're going to add an extra pool. You know, they're going to maybe get golf. They're going to do some of those things. This school in East St. Louis, it was one of the worst schools. They had sewage running through one of the kitchens. So guess what? They're not going to get a pool or a new computer room. So to go in and say, we're going to give everybody $1 million and all things are equal, and you people should be happy. It doesn't work that way because you're not starting with the same material. It's the same way with your students at that student level. You know, to say, you know, it's great if you do get in a population of African American students that have the SAT score, the ACT score, the GRE score, and they're commensurate. That's absolutely wonderful. but not all students are going to be at that level, and you can't use that as a marker to say that they shouldn't be admitted to the institution. I get it, everybody wants to rise in U.S. News and World Report, but sometimes that whole notion of rising as an institution and your mission for the betterment of all students, and this is the narrative I have, sometimes those things are at odds, because I don't think the measures that we use to rise in U.S. News and World Report are the things that are best for, you know, our communities and for certain communities. Okay, really quickly, because I know. So, I shared with you what the major research question and what I have been looking at, but I wanted, again, to look at HBCUs versus predominantly white institutions to see what they were doing to support these high-achieving males. I'm not going to bore you with this, but I just want to show you there is a purpose for all this. This is what the, take this and then do a copy and paste, so 2 images, because remember I did the historically black college and the predominantly white institution, so it was the same design at each institution. What I did with my research and what this book is based on is that I went into the institution and I wanted to identify, and I did identify, these high-achieving African-American males, academically gifted. And I used GPA of 3.25 and above to identify these students as academically gifted. And I had to put the caveat in there. My dissertation chair insisted that you put the caveat in there that you do recognize that there are other forms of giftedness, and this logical, mathematical, test-taking, schoolhouse giftedness that you're doing is not the best for your population. So I did that. But these brothers that I identified across the 2 institutions all had GPAs over a 3.25. I had a mini meltdown. I tell my doctoral students, I was like, you know, don't be dismayed. We all have those mini meltdowns. I had mine. So my mini meltdown came with my initial design and when I actually went out to try to recruit students. So my institutions are Texas A&M Commerce, Texas A&M University Commerce, and Grambling State University. Now, Grambling was the HBCU. So you had to have a 3.25, you had to have been identified as gifted and talented in K-12, you had to have participated in a gifted program, you had to. When I got out there, I interviewed 8 students at the predominantly white institution, Texas A&M Commerce, and I interviewed 6 students at the HBCU. Out of those 14 students, now mind you, all of them were in science, technology, they were in one of the STEM disciplines, math, chemistry. All of these African American males across the 2 institutions, the 14, all of them had over a 3.25 GPA. How many of them do you think were identified as gifted and talented in K-12?
None.
None? 2. None. So I called my chair, and I'll never forget, he was in Chicago attending one of our education conferences, AERA, and I called him, and he had his cell phone, and I called him, and I didn't get him, and I called him right back, so I'm sure he was talking to some folks, he just got out of session, and the phone kept ringing, so I guess he was like, well, so he's like, hello, Fred, is something wrong? And I was like, oh, my study is falling apart, oh my God, all these guys that have been gifted and talented, and he was like, what? He's like, hold on a minute. So he walks out, and he's like, what is going on with you? I'm like, my study, and he was like, Bob. So you just gave me an 80-page lit review. And what did you say in the lit review about African American males? I said, well, they go under-identified,